there's a version of you the world hasn't met yet. He's colder, sharper, unbothered by noise. He doesn't chase validation, doesn't flinch under pressure, and moves like a man who's already seen the truth. But you'll never meet that version of yourself while surrounded by people. You'll only meet him when you vanish, when you finally disconnect from everything that keeps you comfortable. Machiavelli once said, "Power doesn't come when you feel good. It comes when you're stripped of everything unnecessary." And that's the secret most never discover. When you're left alone, with no friends to distract you, no voices to reassure you, no noise to hide behind, you meet your real self. The self that doesn't ask for advice. The self that stops seeking permission. The self that destroys what slows him down. But here's the catch. That transformation only happens when you stop fearing solitude. Most people can't. The silence terrifies them. So they run back to the crowd, to comfort, to the illusion of belonging. They never realize that solitude isn't isolation, it's strategy. In this video, you'll see why being alone is one of the greatest weapons of power you'll ever have. You'll learn how silence sharpens your mind, how solitude exposes truth, and how detachment turns you into something few can compete with. Let's start with the simplest truth. Most people never see clearly because they're never alone long enough to do it. They drown in conversation, opinions, and constant noise. Surrounded by others, they absorb secondhand beliefs, recycled emotions, and false confidence. They react instead of thinking. They conform instead of questioning. They lie to themselves, and everyone helps them do it. But the one who isolates himself, who steps away from all that noise, he sees what others can't. When you're alone, the masks people wear begin to fade. The lies dissolve. And for the first time you see things, and yourself, for what they really are. That's why solitude isn't a weakness. It's a weapon. Because the truth you discover in silence gives you an advantage that no crowd can match. Machiavelli understood this. When he was exiled from political life, he didn't waste time crying about betrayal or injustice. He withdrew. He observed. He studied the raw mechanics of human nature without filters. And what did he find? That most men are cowards, hiding behind morality. That loyalty is conditional. That fear is more reliable than love. And that people crave control. They just want it disguised as kindness. These were not theories. They were truths he saw firsthand when stripped of illusion. That's what solitude does. It makes you confront reality without permission. Now ask yourself, how much sharper would your mind become if you cut out the noise? No friends sugarcoating your flaws. No social media distorting your worth. No small talk cluttering your thoughts. Just you versus the truth. It's not comfortable, but it's real. And that reality gives you something priceless. Leverage. Because while others chase distraction, you're building discipline. While they make emotional decisions, you're calculating outcomes. While they play the role society wrote for them, you're writing your own script. That's the true value of solitude. It doesn't just give you focus. It gives you clarity. You start to see who actually respects you, who merely tolerates you, and who only stays close out of convenience. You begin to notice the lies people live, and more importantly, the ones you've told yourself. And when that self-deception finally dies, your power becomes real, because it's built on truth, not illusion. Solitude strips away the fake comfort of distraction. It leaves you face to face with your vanity, your laziness, your false ambitions, your dependencies. And if you can stand in that fire without running back to comfort, something inside you changes. You stop needing to be right. You start needing to see clearly. And that clarity, it's the rarest kind of power. It's the power to read patterns others ignore, to predict moves before they happen, to act when others freeze. That's how you become effective beyond emotion, almost inhumanly so. That's why history's strongest figures were loners, not because they hated people, but because they valued truth more than attention. Truth, unfiltered and unpolished, lives only in solitude. You can't reach it while chasing approval. You can't find it when you fear being misunderstood. You can't touch it when you're addicted to being liked. You reach it alone when there's no one left to lie to, not even yourself. So if you want real vision, not motivation, not hype, but vision, step away. Stay there until the illusions die. Because when they do, you'll come back changed. Not just stronger, but unreadable. Not just smarter, but dangerous. That's when you stop seeing the world as people tell you it is, and start seeing it as it truly is. That's when you stop playing the game and start controlling it. And that, Machiavelli would say, is the beginning of unstoppable power. Most people aren't truly free, not because they live in chains, but because they're addicted to attention, approval, and validation. They don't know how to exist without being seen, and that dependency makes them weak. Machiavelli warned, "He who depends on others to stand will fall when they walk away." Look around today. Almost everyone fits that description. Their confidence is rented, their peace outsourced. They need likes to feel valuable, praise to feel whole, company to feel safe. But the man who learns to stand alone, the one who breaks free from that need, he becomes something else entirely. He becomes untouchable. He doesn't beg for affection. He doesn't chase validation. He doesn't wait to be chosen. He chooses himself. And that is the foundation of real power. Because the man who can think, act, and move without needing approval is no longer owned. He doesn't dance for attention. He doesn't shrink for comfort. He builds in silence, guided only by his own judgment. Let's make this practical. When you depend on others emotionally, you become predictable. They know what to say to lift you and what to say to break you. That's control. And it's control you gave away willingly. But when you embrace solitude, you remove their leverage. You become a mystery they can't manipulate. They can't guilt you, tempt you, or destabilize you, because you've learned to be enough on your own. That's why society conditions you to fear being alone, because a man who's comfortable in solitude cannot be governed. Machiavelli never glorified human nature. He exposed it. He saw that most people are driven by need for comfort, love, validation, attention. And those needs are used to control them like strings on a puppet. But when you cut those strings, you become something terrifying, a man who moves without permission. This is why kings, strategists, and rulers throughout history spent long stretches of time in isolation, not to escape the world, but to master it. Power requires distance. Distance creates perspective, and perspective reveals what emotion always hides. If you want to be respected, you need space. If you want to be powerful, you need silence. Because proximity breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort kills respect. Let's bring this down to real life. Solitude means saying no to energy-wasting invitations. It means walking away from relationships that offer comfort, but no growth. It means being okay with being misunderstood, disliked, or even feared. Because you know your path is bigger than public approval. It's choosing nights of thinking, planning, and building while everyone else scrolls, gossips, and wastes time. It's not glamorous. It's not fun. But it's how you forge mental dominance. Machiavelli's power didn't come from armies or influence. It came from solitude. When he was exiled, humiliated, stripped of status, he didn't beg to be accepted again. He vanished. He withdrew into silence and wrote, The Prince, a book so precise, so coldly intelligent, that it terrified rulers for centuries. He didn't need access. He needed clarity, and clarity only lives in silence. Why? Because crowds cloud your mind. When you're constantly surrounded, you start to absorb other people's fears, habits, and limits. You start thinking like them. You begin to mirror mediocrity, but solitude breaks that. It disconnects you from the herd. It lets you see from above the entire game board instead of just your tiny square. When you step away, something strange happens. Your vision sharpens. Your judgment improves. You become harder to fool and harder to influence. That's why powerful men retreat before they rise. It's not weakness, it's refinement. You can't build a fortress in the middle of a carnival. You can't craft precision surrounded by chaos. And you can't build mental strength when you're emotionally entangled in everyone else's drama. Solitude is not loneliness, it's strategic detachment. And most people fear it because it forces them to confront themselves. They fill their lives with noise friends, calls, gossip, distractions, not because they're social, but because they're running from silence. They fear what they'll find there, because when you're alone, there's no one left to blame. No one to distract you from your failures. No one to lie to you about who you are. Just you and the truth. And that truth is uncomfortable. It reveals your laziness, your envy, your excuses. It forces you to evolve or be exposed. But if you endure that process without retreating, you earn something almost supernatural: clarity. You stop needing the world's noise to guide you. You start trusting your instincts again. You become emotionally independent. You start seeing the games people play and stop participating. You stop trying to be liked and start becoming respected. That's when your solitude turns into strength. Because while others are desperate to be seen, you're building something they can't see until it's too late. While they chase validation, you're creating leverage. While they try to be loved, you're learning to be feared without saying a word. And Machiavelli would call that the highest form of freedom. Not the ability to do whatever you want, but the strength to need nothing from anyone. Machiavelli once said, "It's much safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." And most people never understand what he meant. He wasn't glorifying cruelty, he was explaining control. Love, he observed, depends on closeness, on constant emotional exchange. But fear can be built from distance. It doesn't require warmth. It requires strength, self-command, and silence. And that's why solitude trains power in a way nothing else can. When no one's watching, you're forced to lead yourself. No audience, no applause, no validation. Just you and the mirror. That's where discipline is born. Because when no one's checking on you, no one's clapping for you, and you still show up, you've crossed the line from motivation to mastery. Solitude builds what society destroys: self-regulation. You learn to move without being pushed, to rest without permission, to build without anyone noticing. And that's what terrifies people about solitude. It makes you sovereign. In the quiet, you stop needing emotional noise to stay alive. Your mind stops chasing stimulation and starts creating clarity. But here's where most men fail. They want power, but they can't stand being alone long enough to earn it. They crumble in the silence, because when the distractions are gone, they have to face what's left: their habits, their wasted time, their lack of purpose. Machiavelli would call this the moment of purification, because until you strip yourself of the illusions that keep you comfortable, you can't build real control. Let's talk psychology for a second. Your brain adapts to whatever environment it lives in. If your environment is full of noise, gossip, endless scrolling, your brain becomes addicted to chaos. It starts craving it. It can't focus, it can't plan, it can't create strategy. But when you isolate yourself, When you step back from constant input, your mind starts recalibrating. At first, it feels unbearable. Your thoughts get louder. Your urges intensify. You'll want to run back to noise. But if you hold still, if you push through that discomfort, something remarkable happens. You begin to see yourself clearly for the first time. Not the version you present to others, the real one. The one you've ignored for years. And when that confrontation happens, you either break or you evolve. If you evolve, you gain something that can't be faked: inner authority, the ability to direct your life without external approval. That's what solitude builds. A man who leads himself is a man no one can control. Now think about how modern society trains you. Always online, always talking, always reacting, notifications, messages, opinions. Every second, someone else is trying to claim a piece of your attention. And every time you give in, you surrender power. Because attention is energy, and the man who cannot control his attention can control nothing. Solitude reverses that. It reclaims your time. It reclaims your mental space. And that's when you start to think strategically. Because without the fog of reaction, you can finally plan your next move with precision. Machiavelli didn't need crowds to learn the psychology of rulers. He learned it in exile, alone. He didn't have wealth, soldiers, or allies. He had thought, observation, and time. And with those, he shaped The Prince, a book that outlived kingdoms. That's the power of isolation. It transforms silence into strategy. But make no mistake, this path is brutal. Because solitude reveals every flaw you've been hiding. It shows you your false goals, your vanity, your laziness. It confronts you with your emotional addictions, the people, the comfort, the validation you've depended on. It's psychological war. And you're both the general and the enemy. But if you can endure that war, if you can stand in the silence without breaking, you'll realize something few ever do. You never needed as much as you thought. Not approval, not attention, not noise, just focus. And that's when your entire energy shifts. You become calm under pressure. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You start calculating. And that calmness, it terrifies people. Because they can't read you anymore. They can't trigger you. They can't predict you. You've become something they don't understand. And people fear what they can't understand. That's the Machiavellian transformation. When silence stops being your punishment and becomes your power. Think about it. While everyone's fighting for attention, you're conserving energy. While they argue to be heard, you're learning to listen. While they burn themselves out, proving their worth, you're sharpening your perception. In time, you'll begin to see patterns others miss. You'll see who's weak, who's desperate, who's pretending. And you'll see that most people's strength is an illusion built on applause. But yours, it's real. Because it was built in the dark. And once you come out of that solitude, colder, quieter, sharper people will say you've changed. They'll call you distant, hard to reach, unemotional. Good. That's what evolution looks like to those still asleep. You're not here to be understood. You're here to build something only the discipline can comprehend. So yes, disappear. Withdraw from the noise. Go dark for as long as it takes. Because when you return, you won't be chasing validation anymore. You'll be commanding respect. And that shift, the quiet, deliberate one, is how power begins. You can't sharpen a blade in a storm, and you can't sharpen your mind in constant noise. Yet most men live in storms of their own making, always busy, always talking, always reacting. They confuse movement with progress. They confuse visibility with value. Today's world worships noise. Everyone's shouting, posting, performing, but no one's thinking. They call it connection, but it's addiction. Addiction to being seen, to being relevant, to never feeling alone. Machiavelli would have laughed at this. He'd say, "You cannot command what you cannot control." And if you can't even control your own attention, you command nothing. He knew the secret centuries ago. Silence creates power. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's focus. When you step out of the noise, you force your mind to start working for you, not against you. You start producing thoughts instead of consuming them. And in that stillness, you realize how much of your life has been reaction, not strategy. Noise makes you emotional. Silence makes you strategic. And the man who thinks strategically always beats the one who reacts emotionally. When you're alone, your brain recalibrates. At first, the quiet feels painful. You reach for your phone. You crave company. You want to escape your own thoughts. But if you stay there, if you breathe through the discomfort, something changes. You start hearing your own voice again, the one buried beneath years of distraction and dependency. At first, it's faint. Then it gets clearer, and what it tells you might unsettle you. How much time you've wasted. How much of your life has been built to please others. How much of your confidence was never real, just borrowed from their approval. That's your awakening. And once that awakening begins, you can't go back. You can't unsee how dependent you were. You can't unhear how loud the world really is. You start craving the silence, not fearing it, because in that silence, you find control. You stop reacting, you start observing, you stop defending, you start calculating, you stop chasing, you start attracting, and people feel that shift immediately. They can't quite explain it, but they sense it. The stillness in your posture, the calm in your tone, the precision in your movements. You've become unreadable. When you speak, your words land harder, because they weren't born from chatter. They were forged in stillness. That's why true Machiavellian thinkers speak little and move rarely. Every action, every word, every silence is intentional. Noise is reactive. Silence is deliberate. Noise is impulsive. Silence is surgical. The average man uses words to fill the air. The powerful man uses silence to control it. That's the paradox. The quieter you become, the louder your presence grows. You begin to notice how addicted people are to reaction. They can't handle pauses. They rush to fill every silence because they fear what might surface in it, their own insecurity, their own irrelevance. But you're not afraid anymore. You let the silence stretch. You let others scramble to interpret it. And in doing so, you own the room without saying a thing. This is psychological dominance, not through aggression or noise, but through precision, restraint, and detachment. Machiavelli would have called it invisible rule, the ability to influence without display, to guide outcomes without needing credit. And that's the goal of solitude. To stop seeking power through recognition and start gaining power through awareness. You start seeing the invisible strings pulling everyone else. You see how easy people are to control because they need attention, comfort, and noise to feel alive. They don't act, they react. They don't choose, they follow. But the man who's learned to master solitude moves differently. He's not addicted to approval. He's addicted to clarity. He doesn't fear stillness. He craves it, because stillness is where he recalibrates, refines, and rebuilds. And that refinement gives him an edge that others can't even see coming, because while they're improvising under pressure, he's executing a plan. While they're busy posting about what they're doing, he's doing what they'll never post about. While they're competing for attention, he's collecting information. That's the power of being alone. You move on your own rhythm. You create your own tempo. and the world eventually has to adjust to you. Because the man who controls his time controls his world. The man who controls his silence controls his influence. Machiavelli didn't have status, wealth, or armies when he wrote The Prince. He had something far greater autonomy over his hours. While others chased favors, he built understanding. While they fought for validation, he refined his vision. While they sought noise, he mastered silence. And that's why his words still shape minds 500 years later. Because clarity, true clarity, outlives everything. Understand this. You cannot lead anything until you command your time. And you cannot command your time until you learn to be alone. Every hour you spend scattered, available, overstimulated, is an hour you've surrendered. Every moment you spend reacting to others' urgency is a moment you've given away your control. But the man who chooses solitude doesn't just manage his time, he owns it. He doesn't fill his calendar, he filters it. He doesn't chase opportunities, he designs them. And when he moves, it's not for attention, it's for advantage. That's why solitude isn't peace, it's power. Because in that quiet space where no one's watching, you're not escaping life, you're mastering it. Solitude isn't punishment, it's purification. It's the quiet battlefield where you strip away illusions, test your strength, and rebuild yourself from the ground up. And Machiavelli knew this truth long before the modern world forgot it. Silence isn't emptiness, it's control. Most men avoid solitude because they fear what they'll find there. They fear the thoughts they've buried under distractions. They fear the truth about their wasted time, their fake confidence, their dependence on others. So they fill the air with noise talking, scrolling, seeking validation. They mistake being surrounded for being alive. But solitude is the opposite. It's not death, it's rebirth. It's the process of dying to weakness, to noise, to dependency, so that a colder, clearer version of you can emerge. The version that doesn't chase attention, the version that doesn't explain himself, the version that's immune to manipulation. Machiavelli understood that the man who fears being alone is already ruled, because a man who cannot stand by himself will always kneel for company. And in every age, those who kneel are the ones who lose. That's why the crowd stays trapped. They seek comfort in noise, not power in silence. They can't imagine walking alone without being lost. But the truth is, every great mind, every strategist, every ruler, every thinker became great only after they withdrew. Distance creates perspective. Perspective creates clarity. And clarity creates control. That's why solitude isn't isolation, it's intelligence. When you're alone, you see what others can't. The patterns behind people's motives, the illusions behind their words, the fragility behind their confidence. You start noticing how most people live on reaction, not reason. They speak to fill silence, act to impress, move without direction. But you start moving with purpose. Machiavelli would call this strategic stillness. It's the calm of a man who no longer needs the crowd to remind him who he is. It's the quiet of someone who acts when he chooses, not when he's expected. And that calm terrifies people, because they can't read you anymore. They can't predict you. They can't provoke you. Your silence becomes a wall they can't climb. A mystery they can't decode. That's the essence of power, not in shouting the loudest, but in saying nothing and letting others reveal themselves. Not in constant movement, but in precise, deliberate action. Not in being available, but in being rare. You begin to see that your presence only has value when your absence has meaning. The man who's always accessible becomes ordinary. The man who steps away becomes remembered. That's why rulers vanish. That's why masters retreat, because what's scarce is always respected, and what's constant is always forgotten. When you walk away often enough, you force the world to adjust to your rhythm. Your time stops belonging to others. Your emotions stop being manipulated. Your silence starts commanding attention without a single word. People will notice it. They'll whisper that you've changed. They'll call you distant, cold, detached. But what they really mean is this: they can no longer use you. Because the man who has mastered solitude doesn't need permission. He doesn't need praise. He doesn't need peace from others. He creates it for himself. Machiavelli lived it. He had no army, no allies, no throne. But he had clarity, and that was enough. He turned isolation into insight, rejection into dominance, silence into strategy. While others fought for attention, he built understanding, and that understanding gave him power that outlasted kings. That's the lesson the modern world refuses to learn. Everyone's chasing visibility, forgetting that real power is invisible. Everyone's trying to be heard, not realizing the man who controls silence controls the conversation. Everyone's moving fast, but few are moving intentionally. But the man who embraces solitude, he moves differently. He observes instead of reacts. He plans while others panic. He knows that a single decisive action taken in silence outweighs 100 loud attempts made in desperation. When you master being alone, you stop wasting energy trying to be understood. You stop fighting for space in a room that doesn't deserve you. You walk out and let silence do the talking. Because when you no longer explain, the world starts wondering. And wondering is the seed of influence. That's the hidden power of solitude. It makes you unexplainable. And what can't be explained can't be controlled. So yes, vanish. Go quiet. Pull away from the noise that dulls your instincts. Spend time alone long enough to build a mind that doesn't need reassurance and a heart that doesn't beg for belonging. Because once you've mastered solitude, you won't need to chase power. You'll become it. You'll see the game from above while others are still trapped inside it. You'll stop being the player and start being the one who sets the board. Machiavelli's final lesson wasn't about manipulation. It was about mastery, not of others, but of self. He proved that the man who commands his silence, his focus, his solitude, commands the world. And when you reach that point, you'll never fear being alone again. Because you'll realize solitude isn't emptiness. It's freedom. It's sovereignty. It's the beginning of unstoppable power.